There are many problems associated with colonizing other planets. Now, I mean, if you take all of them, then you start to think, getting to other planets and actually living on them is pretty near impossible, but it's not, and, recent technology has proven this. But that doesn't mean it's easy. And there are many, many, many different problems with it. There's actually getting there, there is creating the system to get there, there's making that system work, there's actually living on the surface of this new planet, how are you going to survive, what shelters are you going to build, there's all that. But those problems aside, there is a problem associated with working on the surface of this new planet, and it's to do with the gravity. Now, it's not like the gravity is going to be too strong or too weak if you've chosen the correct planet. Say if we went to Mars, the gravity there is about 1/3 of Earth's, so 0.3 Gs. We can work in that fine. We can work in zero gravity fine, but going from zero gravity to 0.3 Gs and working fine is harder. Because in zero gravity, although as the Mercury program set out to prove, humans can work and can function in a zero gravity environment for prolonged durations, we can do that. And people do that every day on the International Space Station. But after they come down from the International Space Station, they are subject to many different problems, because without the effects of gravity, things happen to the human body. And those things include bones wasting away. You get bone deficiencies that happen because they're not carrying the body anymore. They don't have a purpose really. They're not under the loads that they used to under 1G. So when you get back to 1G, your bones are very weak, muscles waste away, they become less strong, they work less efficiently, and people are more prone to kidney stones, diabetes, high blood pressure, low blood pressure. People become very susceptible to medical conditions like that. So after a 2 or 3 year flight in the Kerbal space program, the most likely candidate for colonization in the Kerbal space program is Lathe. Obviously, it's got an oxygen atmosphere. That is the crux of it. It's got an oxygen-based atmosphere, and the composition, we're told, is roughly that of Kerbin's. The gravity is very similar. It's actually slightly less, which is nice for us. Quite comfortable. Be able to jump around massive heights and run, stuff like that. And it's got liquid water oceans, presumably. I think it has anyway. It's very much like Kerbin. Now, the trip to get there would take about 2 to 3 years, I think, if we were doing a standard, Hoffman transfer. And in those 2 to 3 years, the spine elongates because it's not under any pressure, our bones waste away, and by the time that we get there, we're basically lying around panting under the extra pressure of living in the gravity at the bottom of a gravity well. How do you solve this problem? Well, the one way is to construct a massive ring. And why would we want to do this? Well, there's one thing that everyone knows, and that's centrifugal force, or more accurately, centripetal force, which is that if you take a bucket on the end of a string and you fill it with water, and then you swing it round your head really fast, the water will stay in the bucket magically. It won't drip out despite the angle at which you're swinging it. It will actually be seemingly attracted to the base of the bucket. And it's the same principle. If you take a massive ring and you put people inside that on the base, it's like fairground rides, you feel this attraction to the walls or to the base of the ring if you're standing on it. And that is a way to simulate artificial gravity. Now, of course, there's problems with that, which is that we have to find out what the optimum distance, the optimum diameter of the ring would be, because if you're spinning too fast, if the diameter is too large, then you could feel way too much gravity. But with all that aside, imagine that you've done all the maths like people I know have, and you find the perfect condition to keep this ring in, to keep this spinning ring, and you acquire these problems to do with our perception of the laws of physics. Now, I'm not saying that they're changing, but I'm just saying that the way we perceive them changes. For instance, it's actually possible in that kind of environment to kick a football forwards and have it do a loop-de-loop in mid-air. Seems ridiculously impossible, but really the ball is actually just travelling in a straight line relative to the ring, because you, this entire time, are spinning around sitting at the base of this ring, and everything you perceive looks different because you don't realise that. You wouldn't actually feel... You probably would have some sort of inner ear problems. I don't know really. I don't really know much about the effects on the medical side of things from this spinning, but everything you see is perceived differently, which is really interesting. Now, onto the more practical problem is, how do you build a ring in space? Docking is hard in the Kerbal space program, so if we were to simulate building a ring in space, how would we go about it? Now, as you've been watching this background footage, I've been attempting to do this. This is my prototype, and this video is part 1 of hopefully 2. I haven't actually built the final product yet, but this is my prototype I'm constructing now. And in the ideal situation, in reality, you would construct this ring out of several pieces. Say 12 pieces, and you would have them, you know, docked together and delivered by spaceplane payload, perhaps, and docked together in space. Now, the problem with that in the Kerbal Space Program is that docking is a bit of a tricky business. Just positioning the things together isn't the problem, it's the fact that things have a habit of swaying horribly and jostling around and not docking at the correct orientation, and yeah, so instead of doing it along 6 different parts or 12 different parts, I've gone for 3. Of course, this leads to some interesting problems, being that we're going to have to lift a third of this ring up, which is a massive surface area for air to take its effect on air resistance. But being the Kerbal Space Program, that's not really a major issue. We don't really have a simulation of air resistance, so the problems with that aren't massive. We can just lift this thing in thirds. So despite that's not really what would happen, that's what we're going to do for the purpose of this simulation of sorts. So what am I doing at the moment? Well, as you've seen in the background footage, I'm sorry I haven't really been commentating it, I've been going off talking about microgravity. In the background footage you saw that we have to make this ring, or this third, not equal to the central strut that's connecting it to the body of the actual spacecraft. It has to be a bit lopsided so the panels don't overlap, and of course this means the centre of mass is off centre, and yeah, that makes docking a bit difficult. So we put on the probe as counterweight, and that's it, and bam, there's a launch stage along with a docking module, and bam, there's a central bit of our docking ring, and bam, there's a launch stage for the central bit of our docking ring. This video isn't about the actual launch stages themselves or actually launching the things, it's just about putting the ring together and spinning it and seeing what would happen. Now, I don't actually know whether this would work. I really hope it will, that I'll actually be able to put a Kerbal inside the ring of this spinning inside the spinning ring and have him stand on the outer walls. That would be a present. That would make me so ridiculously happy if that was possible, but sadly I somehow doubt it. But, you know, we can't discount anything. So we do the launch, blah 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 blah. We get this thing up, we do our gravity turn, we drop that pair, we move over, and we get into the orbit. This is the easiest part, and the difficulty of this mission went up and up and up and up at an accelerating rate along the 4 different launches it required. That being, the first one is this one, where we launch the centre of our massive ring. The second one is the first third, the second is the second third, and the third is the third third. So we detach that and we get this thing into its orbit, doing all this in the video at accelerated pace, and we circularize about there. I've chosen 150 km orbit for no discernible reason, it just was okay. Now, this is just a prototype, and the reason I've done a prototype rather than going for the entire thing is that problems do occur with my missions, certainly. I don't know anyone who actually plays the game does rather what's the word, ambitious projects like this and get it right first time. So I'm just assembling this prototype ring in orbit and seeing what goes wrong with the mission. Now, things do go wrong, But it's not major things. I'm looking to get this so incredibly perfect that I even don't want to leave any space debris around. I want everything to be able to return. So the counterweight I've put on the uneven side of this ring third, I'm probably going to carry on just by calling that a ring. I will forget to call it a third occasionally, please do forgive me. But the counterweight I've put on to bring the centre of mass over, I've made that deorbitable. It's actually a probe, and it can actually deorbit itself. I don't want to leave anything unnecessarily in space. Unfortunately we do, because the separator, the decoupler I've used to mount it onto the docking node, is actually going to stay and float around in space, so that's not brilliant. That's something I want to change as we get our apparatus and detach and go up for our circularization and subsequent rendezvous. Another thing I want to change is the fact that the counterweight is actually mounted on the docking port, which, looking back and reflecting now, that wasn't such a brilliant idea, to be honest. I mean, it's supposed to, the counterweight itself is actually supposed to bring the centre of mass towards the centre so that I can use my RCS thrusters to do the docking. Now, if I'm going to do docking, I need to have every single docking port free. In this case I don't, seeing as this is the first third. God, I'm going to mix myself up so much with that. This is the first third, so it's actually not got to dock laterally with any other thirds. It's just by itself, so I can keep the counterweight on. But in the future, with the second and third third, I'm going to have to detach that counterweight before I actually dock, which makes doing the manoeuvring slightly harder. I didn't actually feel the effects of that, luckily, but in theory it would. So that's the thing I want to change. Now, as we come in for our first docking, the first docking of the first third, we get so very close. This video was going to be 35 minutes. I've managed to, well no, the actual recording itself, this entire prototype design and mission, what I've recorded at least, was 2 hours 20 minutes long. So yeah, I've managed to I've taken all that useful footage and actually compressed it down into 26 minutes of useful footage. Hopefully the meaning has not been lost. We dock. That was pretty easy. It's the standard docking in the Kerbal space program. And now, luckily I've got this right. We've docked that third. We can detach this this carrier stage, this docking module, and we decouple that now. Let that float away, and that is also, obviously it's got a guy in it, we can deorbit him. Come on, turn that around, deorbit it, and the probe that's sitting on the docking port to the left will be able to deorbit that as well. So we are on the path of constructing our ring, and it's pretty damn awesome. Already I'm just getting extremely excited by this project. It's a bit out of the ordinary, it's not along with the usual series that I'm doing on my channel, but it is something that I've been wanting to do for an extremely long time, ever since we first started discussing it in my family. Now we've got to think about the future. So what this ring, in theory, for if it was actually to be done, you know, in our universe, not just in games, if we were to actually do this, then there's something we could couple it with to make the delivery of each part. I'm saying that, you know, we should have 12 parts, not the 3 that we're using here, and to lift them into orbit. What's the point in using these waste rockets that we throw up there, and staged rockets that as they are used up, they drop their expensive engines and let them crash into the sea and get permanently damaged? Yeah, we should probably use some sort of efficient and one-stage system that can actually land safely. Yeah, that's a problem. We may want to find a solution to that. Not putting any parachutes on the docking module admittedly was probably a mistake there. But, you know, the mission must continue, so I launched the next one without actually remembering to add parachutes. But yes, what's the point of using these throwaway rockets that use so much fuel and we end up just costing so much to actually put them in orbit? Why not use some sort of reusable spaceplane? Why not? Because it's incredibly hard to build. Why should we? For the whole ton of reasons that I've gleaned upon. But there is a thing in development in Britain called Skylon, and it's a reusable single stage to orbit spaceplane. And you know, in the Kerbal space program, single stages to orbit spaceplanes are a passion for many of us to build, trying to get the perfect one. Unfortunately, having them carry payload is where the problem occurs. We've all, well, not all of us, I mean a lot of us have made single stages to orbit, but making one that can carry payload I have yet to see. And with any luck, I'm actually going to develop one in the final part of this two-part series. So that's going to be another challenge to overcome with the construction of our ring. Speaking of which, we are getting ever closer with our second third. As we bring it in, you know, oh so many meters away, cancel out our relative velocity. And this thing is shaking like crazy. That's the problem. Advanced SAS and fragile pieces that are currently in construction doesn't go well together, doesn't mix. So, you know, docking, as I've said, the difficulty of this mission goes up. The first one was simply putting this into orbit, the second one was docking two things together, the third one we have here, this third launch, this second third, is docking three things together simultaneously. That we have to actually dock this central docking port to the core of our ring, and we have to dock the outer, or one of the outer docking ports to the outer docking port of the first third. Damn, it's complicated, but yes, we'll try and do this now. So the problem, I think, I didn't realize this at the time, and it's lucky that it actually worked, is that when you're moving things together in a 3D space, you not only have to worry about getting them at the correct height relative to each other and putting them together, you have to actually also worry about the orientation. So the rotation of my spacecraft relative to the rotation of the ring, if I don't get that right, then I may dock the central one, but I definitely won't be able to dock the outer ones. And despite having built the entire ring and simulating it in the VAB, which you saw at the start of this video, things don't quite work out. So I'm docking, I'm trying to set it closer together. Now what I want to do first is to dock the central ring. From there I can hopefully flap about the outside and get them by chance to connect together over time. That doesn't quite happen, so that's the first mistake. Apart from killing the pilot earlier. No, the first proper mistake, we don't really care about him, the first mistake is that I accidentally docked the outer ring first, and I think it's unavoidable because it happens again later. So they get closer, and the outer ring docks, leaving the inner ring flapping madly. Not very good for stability, methinks. Let's detach that before it adds to the problems we're experiencing. And now, being the Kerbal space program, docking is a bit of a process. It's a bit of a hit and miss process, to be accurate, where you put things together and you kind of just hope that they are going to eventually snap. Now you can see, I don't mean break, I mean snap together. You can see here the docking ring is too high. It's a whole centimetre. That's what the frustrating part is, that it's a whole centimetre too high. Now, by docking the outer port first, I may have got the orientation wrong, which means that although it's built correctly, the actual part is elevated too high. And as a result, I try and waggle things around to try and get it to dock. And it works, which is nice. But in order to get it work, we just have to kind of hope, and we'll leave it. We'll deorbit the other two modules that we have here. So let's just leave that and hope it fixes itself. So let's change to our probe here, and we can spin this thing around. Now the problem is it hasn't actually got any electrical charge, because to save weight, well no, not really saving weight isn't the problem. We can deorbit that because we have a solar panel on the top, which we used instead of a generator. I needed to make that probe the exact perfect mass in order to shift the mass back to the center, because that uneven third. So third, and yeah, the problem that solar panel gives us problems later on. Now you can see this video footage that we have right here is unusually brightened. Why is that, Harvey? The console and the UI is all randomly sparkly. I've done that to try and boost the brightness of the video. I've also had to boost the contrast at the same time, so the colours are a bit more vivid. But the reason being that I've heard complaints that it's too dark, and that's because it's dark in space. it is dark in space. I mean, there's light from the stars, but when you're on the dark side of the Earth or dark side of the Moon, there's not an awful lot of light. Excuse me. There's not an awful lot of light going. So I've had to boost the brightness. I mean, I could see fine whilst playing, but for some reason the recorded footage was a bit too dark to make out what was going on. So this bit and the next bit of footage are actually going to be a bit easier to see, so you can thank me for that. Now, we do the launch, we get our orbit set up to rendezvous, spin this thing around, warp to our rendezvous, cancel out our relative velocity by burning along our retrograde vector. Just, you know, just everyday rocket science, just stuff that, you know, we're all used to who play the Kerbal space program at this kind of skill level. And now we're going in for our docking. The third, as a result of the exponential difficulty of this project, the third is of course the hardest. So let's get this thing in. We are pretty close, you know, a couple of 100 meters away. We warp, we're about under 40 meters away. Now, as I've said, the orientation is a problem because you have to make sure that everything's rotated along the same axis so that the ring is actually able to be constructed. With 1/3 going into the thing, that was probably the crucial part. Putting the first third into the core, it could have been any offset angle, and making that work from there on is probably the difficulties that we're having to deal with right now. So if that was slightly off, then the second third again might be slightly off, which would add up and make the third gonna have to be extremely off in order to get it to work. We detach that probe, delete the little decoupler that's floating in space, and we let it sail away whilst we try and deal with these problems. Now there's another problem, which is that, sure, we use that counterweight probe to put the center of mass in the center of the actual down the center of the axis of the ship. Now, unfortunately, the center of mass, as you saw earlier, was actually still in the ring section itself. So this is why we have such a massive docking module, which is that we don't actually need all that fuel. All that fuel is simply extra mass to pull the center of mass down towards the thrusters, because I could have mounted thrusters on the actual third, but I didn't want to because that's excess baggage going into the ring that's never going to be used again. So I've had to put all this fuel here in order to counteract the weight, and as a result we've got a big unwieldy docking module, and the center of mass is very far back, which means the camera is very far back. Trying to dock up close and personal whilst having a camera that is trying to push you back towards your docking module is not helpful, but I manage it anyway, and I've managed to dock the two outer rings. The inner docking port is not as lucky. We detach our docking module, we move away from it, and we'll deal with that later. But we've got a fully constructed ring in the process of 2 hours or so. We have this ring that's sitting there in space. And what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to spin it. Now, research has shown that 4 rotations per minute is about optimal for human survival and, you know, stuff like that. We'll actually deorbit this thing first and have a play with our ring later. The first 2 pilots died. They were martyrs for the cause. But luckily for the third guy, he has some know-how about him and actually manages to slow his descent in time, which is nice and dandy for him. Unfortunately, I suspect that the organisation who is building this ring doesn't really want anyone to know about it, because of course it will put the company at an economic advantage, having access to other planets and being able to safely get people there. Presumably this is being done by private companies, because I doubt a government-funded space program would actually achieve this much. The government needs to spend money on, you know, weapons rather than space. Now, that solar panel problem. You just saw a little clip of the solar panel of the probe there, and the electric charge was 0. I couldn't do anything about it. The probe has a solar panel on top, and unfortunately it was pointing south, which the sun is never gonna be, so yeah, that probe is also excess space debris stuck in orbit that I'm not gonna be able to get rid of. But does it matter? No! Our prototype ring is here, and it's spinning. Admittedly, it's spinning rather wobbly once you put physics warp up. Look at that. It's cartwheeling. That's not rotating, it's cartwheeling. Oh man, it is just so fun. Can't believe I haven't done this before. But yeah, so what is it? There are 3 docking ports on the ring and 3 in the centre. We managed to dock 5 out of 6 docking ports correctly, which is quite a good thing. Unfortunately, the next video is the hardest. And that video will come in the future. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I've tried to be a bit more informative than I am usually. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this kind of more informative format, please do like the video to let me know. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you all next time.